Welcome to How to Be a Couple with me, your host, Giuliano Gramado. I remember a few years back hearing this story about this pole that was on this long stretch of highway in the country where there's nothing else, right? And they just like every so often, every mile or so, there's a big pole. And at this pole, it's like a majority of the accidents on the highway are actually hitting this pole, like single car accidents hitting the pole. And I remember when I heard that, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. That's crazy. But when you look into it, it's this phenomenon called target fixation. You may or may not have heard of it, but the idea is that you steer inadvertently in the direction that you look. And anybody who's ever ridden a motorcycle knows this because they constantly teach you to focus on where you're going, right? Instead of looking down at the ground, you're like, where is it that you want to go? And that's where you're supposed to look. And the reason why this is so big with motorcycles is because the feedback is like instant, right? You're on two wheels. So if you're not focusing on the right spot, like you're going to end up in a bad spot. So, a lot of people driving cars don't necessarily know it because it's not as important because you can just kind of steer. But when you're on a motorcycle, where a great deal of like what determines where you're going is the way your body is leaning, it's important that you focus on where you're going. But the same is true. You're probably like, why am I bringing this up? The same is true when it comes to relationships. Okay, this is just simply how your mind works. It's like if you stare at the pole, you hit the pole. Because what would end up happening was like on that stretch of highway, it was like people would lose control of their cars. They see the pole and they're like, oh no, I don't want to hit that pole. And so because of that, they're so focused on not hitting the pole that they end up hitting it. And the reason when the way this ties into relationships, and this is like one of the flagship things I talk about, is how so many couples care so much about never getting divorced that they end up getting divorced. And it's because of this target fixation phenomenon. They're instead of focusing on what the relationship can be, they're so committed to never getting divorced. I don't want to end up divorced that is what their mind is focusing on, and that's where their behavior ends up leading to. It's inadvertent, right? This is not on purpose. Of course, you don't want to get divorced. It seems like a natural thing to just like, why would I disagree with that? Yeah, of course I don't want to get divorced. But when that's your goal, you end up focusing on divorce, and it ends up taking you down that direction anyway. My wife and I were just watching this reality TV show, and these people were talking about marriage and getting married and all this stuff, and they're like, I just don't want to end up divorced. Like I'm not going to get married and then get divorced. I've seen what divorce does. And so people get so hung up on like never getting divorced that they end up going down that road anyway. The idea is that your brain is going to calibrate to where you place your focus. And unfortunately, if you focus on divorce, if you focus on that thing that you fear, you are going to move toward it. It's funny because, like I said before, when someone says like, "Oh, I'm never going to get divorced," you want to like applaud, right? Yes, oh, that's so great. That's so good. Like, it's so good of you. You're so strong. You're so committed. But the problem is that the focus of the relationship is now, how do I not get divorced? And inadvertently, again, this maybe even subconsciously, it's not necessarily on the top of people's minds, but the relationship becomes about survival instead of reaching the relationship's potential. Okay, your focus is on staying instead of thriving. So the shift here, and I know this seems like it's not a big deal, but that's part of the reason why I'm sharing all this whole target fixation stuff. Whenever I mention this, people act like it's just not a big deal, but it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. Your goal cannot be to avoid divorce, and you have to make this shift from trying to avoid divorce to building something amazing. Right? And you can tell the difference just even the way, like, think about how you would approach a relationship if you were like, I don't want to get divorced versus I want to have an amazing relationship. The energy that you are going to bring to every interaction, all of your thoughts, all of your behaviors, all of your goals, all of your plans is going to be different because it's a different energy, right? You want to be asking yourself, how do I avoid divorce? How do we make this amazing? How do we make this the best relationship possible? How do we make it fun? How do we make it deep? So I have an exercise for you guys. I'm calling it the steering wheel exercise. And what I want you to do is write down what it is that you're trying to avoid, right? For a lot of people, divorce is the thing. Okay, I'm trying to avoid divorce. Or they want to stop fighting, or they don't want to end up growing apart, or they don't want to feel disconnected, right? Those are some examples, but write down in your relationship what you feel like you're trying to avoid. Then step two is to take each of those things and rewrite it instead as a positive target. Okay. So, like I mentioned before, like, oh, I don't want to get divorced. Okay. Shift that to, I want to have an amazing relationship. If the other example, I want to avoid fighting with my partner. Okay. Maybe what you want to do is as a positive target, healthy communication. If it's, oh, I'm afraid of growing apart, then your goal should be shared growth, like growing together in the same direction. If your fear is disconnection, if you're trying to avoid feeling disconnected from your partner, then your goal should be to get closer, daily connection. Again, I know that this seems like it's not a big deal, but remember, your mind is going to move you in the direction of where you focus. So instead of focusing on what you don't want, you have to focus on what it is that you do want. Okay, so step three is to ask yourself, what can I do proactively to steer the relationship in this direction, right? When it comes to those positive targets that you've made, what can you do to proactively move the relationship in that direction? This is what it comes down to. You don't build a great relationship by focusing on what you fear. You do it by aiming at what you want, at your goal, at like what you believe a great relationship should be. So if you want personalized help with your relationship, and even when it comes to this exercise, I have a waitlist going to work with me one-on-one. You could just send me a DM on Instagram at howtobeacouple.co that says waitlist, and I'll make sure to add you to the list and let you know when a slot opens up. Otherwise, talk to you next time.